You move this, Deputy O'Brien, yes?
I so move, Ceann
Is that
Comhairle.
agreed? Agreed. So will you introduce your bill then to us? You have 15 minutes.
Thank you, Ceann Comhairle, and thank you to those members and the Minister in attendance. It's a truism, but it's one that cannot be said enough. Rents in the private rental sector are simply too high. For too many people living in the private rental sector, it's expensive, far too expensive. New rents in Dublin are now over €2,000 a month, and average rents in the capital are more than €1,700. Across the state, new rents are €1,400 per month, and in many of our urban centres, even more. The latest data from the Residential Tenancies Board, published in March, shows a 5.4% increase in rents on the same month last year, and Daft.ie published their latest price report in June. And while it showed that COVID-19 was having some impact on the market, it was at best modest. Asking rents were up 0.5% on June of last year. The uncertainty of the student market is having little visible impact on the private rental market, and in fact, this week Daft.ie, in another report, their student housing publication, recorded rises in student rents across the state on last year. The much talked about shift of short-term rental units into the long-term market has failed to materialise, and what new stock is coming on stream is high-end build-to-rent, and in some parts of the city, this new stock, which is exceptionally expensive, is lying vacant. And month on month, the number of tenancies registered with the Residential Tenancies Board continues to fall. According to figures I got from the Residential Tenancies Board last week, we have so far seen this year a loss of 3,295 registered tenancies, and since January 2017, the first month in which registered tenancies started to fall, we've lost an astonishing 20,000 registered tenancies from the private rental stock. Accidental and semi-professional landlords are taking advantage of the return of positive equity and simply getting out of the market. And despite repeated calls by myself and others on the last Minister for Housing to address this disorderly exit of landlords from the market, the problem continues to get worse. So, unfortunately, the future for many renters looks bleak. At best, prices will stagnate as demand far outstrips supply. But for many, rent increases will remain a fact of life. Thousands, if not tens of thousands of renters will continue to pay excessive prices to keep a roof over their heads. Research from the ESRI in 2018 showed that 70% of lower income renters pay up to 40% of their income on rent. And these are people not eligible for HAP or rent supplement or RAS. The latest CSO deprivation data published this month reports an increase in deprivation rates among renters from 27% in 2018 to 34% in 2019. And as the Minister and other deputies know, all of this was before COVID-19. Since then, renters have been disproportionately affected by layoffs and income loss. A huge number of people on the pandemic unemployment payment are younger or lower income workers in sectors such as tourism, entertainment and retail. And the economic impact of the pandemic has hit this group particularly hard. And while the government's income supports have helped, and there is no doubt about that, today many of these people will be hit with cuts to the pandemic unemployment payment of between €200 and €400 a month. Research published by the ESRI and the Department of Housing in July suggests that the impact of COVID-19 income loss on renters' arrears was likely to be limited. However, the report's conclusion contained a stark warning. It said that the longer the economic impact of COVID went on, the greater the chance of struggling renters falling behind on their rent. And in fact, they urged government to be cautious about withdrawing income supports too quickly. Unfortunately, the advice was ignored. The government also ignored the advice of advocacy groups such as Threshold and Focus Ireland when they ended a ban on evictions, notice to quit and rent increases for the vast majority of renters in July. Instead, government provided a limited protection for a smaller group of tenants. And within days, TDs, I'm sure, from across the House were receiving calls from tenants who had received notices to quit or indeed rent hikes. I spoke to one woman who lived outside of Dublin, not in my own constituency and not in a rent pressure zone, She did not qualify for the government's limited protection. Her landlord had upped the rent to €100, the second such increase in 2 years, and her income had fallen by 20% due to COVID-19, but she was not in arrears, not on any COVID payment, and not eligible for the limited supports provided by government. I have to say, families such as these need our protection. Their rents are simply too high and they cannot afford any further increase. The consequence of refusing to provide them with any relief will be increased financial hardship, increased emotional stress, greater poverty and deprivation, and in some cases, unfortunately, the loss of a tenancy and possible homelessness. Now, the Minister says he wants to promote home ownership, and that is a good thing. When he was on this side of the House, he rightly complained that high rents were locking first-time buyers into a rent trap, and he was correct. They could pay rent or save for deposit, but not both. For some, this not only delayed the date when they would eventually own their own home, but they were also forced to put off starting a family. For others, the choice was worse, to live at home with family into the late 30s just to save a deposit. And then, of course, there are those in the latter stages of their working life. Some who lost their family home due to relationship breakdown, others due to mortgage distress or repossession. They are fearful of a life of perpetual uncertainty and unaffordability in the rental sector. And so, Ceann Comhairle, the bill I am proposing tonight is for all of these people. To protect young and low-income renters from further rent hikes, to give older renters greater certainty into the future, and to help those desperately trying to save to buy their own home. A 3-year ban on rent increases for existing and new tenancies is just one of a package of measures which Sinn Féin urged the last government to take on board, and we're doing so again with the new government. Of course, a ban on rent increases is not enough. The cost of renting must also be reduced, and that is why Sinn Féin has repeatedly called for a refundable tax credit for private renters worth a full month's rent. That would put an average €1,400 back into the pocket of every renter in the state. We also need to see a massive investment in affordable cost rental accommodation led by local authorities, approved housing bodies and community housing trusts. Now, much was promised by Fine Gael and supported by Fianna Fáil in Budget 2019. Micheál Martin and Leo Varadkar claimed this was a housing budget. Our current Minister made great play of his role in securing $300 million to be committed to deliver 6,000 affordable homes by 2021 in the Service Sites Fund. To date, not a single affordable home has been delivered under this scheme. In fact, only 50 are currently under construction in Dunleer Rathdown, and these won't be tenanted until next year at a cost of €1,200 per month. And in my view, and in the view of many people, this is not affordable for the vast majority of working renters. We need thousands of affordable cost rental homes delivered every year with rents somewhere between €700 and €900 per month. This can be done and should be done by this government if they are serious about tackling the crisis in the rental market and meeting affordable housing need. We also need to reduce the over-reliance on the private rental sector to meet social housing need. This will only happen if government revise their social housing target upwards. 10,000 real social homes, which is what is committed to be delivered next year, is not enough. We have over 90,000 households living in the private rental sector on social housing supports, and we need a plan to provide these families with real social housing, which in turn will free up even more properties in the private rental sector for private renters or indeed first-time buyers. We also need further reform of the private rental sector. We need a real move to tenancies of indefinite duration, not just the removal of Section 34B of the Residential Tenancies Act. We need improved inspection and enforcement of minimum standards and fire safety through an NCT-type certification for landlords. And we need a comprehensive reform of the tax treatment of landlords, ending the appalling tax breaks for institutional investors while allowing good professional landlords to get a fair return when providing a good service. Rebuilding Ireland has failed renters. The rental market is in fact in a worse place today than when Simon Coveney launched his strategy for the private rental sector in 2017. and only a comprehensive reform providing security and affordability for tenants and landlords will suffice. Sinn Féin's ban on rent increases Bill 2020 is one important piece of the package of measures needed to give renters a break, and I have no hesitation in recommending it to the House. Before I conclude, thank you. I want to note the fact that the Minister was in my own constituency today, and I welcome that fact, out in Adamstown, surveying progress in the SDZ funded by LIHAF. Now, the Minister was rightly very critical of the slow pace of the LIHAF funding over the last number of years. In fact, only last year, he rightly complained that just 16 million out of 2 million, 100 million had been spent. And Adamstown is an interesting example because 20 million was promised back in 2016 and 2017. And the condition of that funding was that the 2,000 LIHAF facilitated units were to be delivered by 2021, and only a fraction of those that have been delivered. But I'm sure the Minister would be interested to note that very close to where he was standing, there was an estate called Shackleton, built by Cairn Homes, facilitated under the LIHAF fund. And 229 of those homes were sold this year by Cairn to what the Minister has on many occasions described as cuckoo funds. And if you look on daft.ie today, you'll see a 2-bed is now renting in Shackleton at €1,800 a month, and a 1-bed, quite small, at €1,500. And the vast majority of the discounted units that were committed to, and this is no fault of the Minister's, he wasn't responsible for that back in 2016 and 2017, but the vast majority of the discounted units have not been delivered. And of the 400 larger discounted units, they're not guaranteed at the price of $320,000 or less because they are linked to inflation and to construction prices, both which have increased considerably, as the Minister knows, since the original agreement was made in 2017. So the reason I'm raising this is because if the Minister is considering renewing or adding to the local infrastructure housing activation fund in the budget, he needs to ensure he doesn't repeat the mistakes of his predecessor, so that funding only goes to developers who need it. Cairn Homes didn't. They made over 68 million in net profits last year, 56 million in net profits the year before. That it delivers the homes within the time it's meant to, and that there is genuine affordability, as was promised through the LIHAF Fund in Rebuilding Ireland, but hasn't been delivered. And I'm raising that as a genuine issue of concern, because I know the Minister shared many of my concerns before, because he's now in the driving seat and has the influence to ensure any future infrastructural funding is tied very clearly to timeframes for delivery and genuine affordability for working families. Thank you.